Is your story part of a larger story? How do we find our way back to belonging? Let's talk about it with Sharon Hersh on Steve Brown, etc.
He's an old white guy, an author, broadcaster, and seminary professor who's sick of religion. And he's brought friends. Please welcome Steve Brown, etc.
Hey, we are so glad you're here. You always have a seat at our table. My name is Steve. I'm the aforementioned old white guy. Our favorite mega church pastor, Zach Van Dyke, is here. Zach, you're here. You're not dead, so the new school year must be off to an okay start, right?
It's, let's just say I'm at home today and we'll probably see my kids at some point during this interview. I can't keep them away.
Just so you people know who didn't see it, Zach was very much for the opening of the school year and getting his kids out of the house. And that had nothing to do with COVID or anything spiritual or righteous. He just wanted them out of the house, and he's got a bunch. How many at last count?
I think 6. I think we're holding it 6.
Matthew Porter is, of course, here. Matthew, when you guest hosted last week, you got to talk to a real film director. How was that?
It was very exciting. It's very exciting. It was a great interview with John, and yes, very exciting to talk to a real movie director.
And by the way, guys, that's a joke. Matthew is a real life film director, and not only that, an award-winning one. And he's also the guy who makes me look pretty on at Key Life.
Well,
along with John and Jinx and the others. Speaking of Jinx,
Steve, I can't do anything about that.
Jinx is working hard in his little glass booth. Jinx welcomes you to join him in his new political movement, the Party Party.
We don't care who we're voting for. Just get on the boat.
Our video director, John Myers, is in his tech bunker. John encourages everyone to try going vegan, which will mean more steak for him. And I like that, Matthew.
Yeah.
Dr. George Bingham is the president of Key Life. President Truman said the buck stops here. President Bingham says all the bucks should stop here. And
there you go.
And Kathy Wyatt is the soft, feminine side of the program. Kathy will never enter a life of crime, but if she did, it would be organized crime, highly organized and properly scheduled crime.
Let's hope that never happens.
Matthew's running out of material.
Oh, I ran out of material last year. Are you kidding?
Just do Kathy first in the intro so she gets
I've been coasting for months. I mean, please. Let's not act like this is a new development.
Sharon Hersh is our guest. She's a licensed professional counselor. All of us are lining up after this broadcast to get free counseling for her, because we were pushing her book, and that was a deal. We traded off. I'm first, and then everybody else will follow. So she's got a tough day ahead of her today. She's an adjunct professor in graduate counseling programs in a number of places, a sought-after speaker and author of a whole bunch of books, one of which I hold in my nicotine-stained fingers. It's titled Belonging, Finding the Way Back to One Another. Sharon, thanks for taking your time with us.
It is great to be with you. And as always, starting out with a smile.
You know something? There probably couldn't be a better time book than your book. We live in a time, I just went to church last week and I realized the theological implications of that. One doesn't go to church, one is church along with the people of God. But I went to church really and didn't do it on screen. And during this pandemic thing, that among 1,000 other things have shown me that I really do need people. And something supernatural happens when God's people come together, not on a screen or online, but actually come together to worship the God they love and who loves them. And I felt it and enjoyed it and was glad for it. But it was a rare experience. If you check out social media, if you read what politicians say of other politicians and Christians say of other Christians, and not even to speak of what Christians say about pagans and pagans say about Christians, I mean, we're a divided, angry, hostile culture. And it's scary, and it's doing bad things to us emotionally and spiritually. And I just, for my part, found your book to be so well-timed, so incredible, and so convicting. I mean, this book is practical, and you're not going to like it because you got to, in order to fix this thing, you got to set aside a lot of, well, when I was a pagan, I had better words for it, but you got to set aside a lot of stuff. Tell us, Sharon, what was the thing that got you moving on thinking, well, your ministry's this anyway, but got to thinking about this particular book?
Well, Steve, I wish I could tell you that I wrote this book because I knew we would be in this season of distance and division and disconnection. But this book actually began 4 years ago and was really more a process in my own life, which maybe this pandemic is making some of us confront ourselves and revealing some cracks that were already there. For me personally, I had division within my own family. I was disconnected out of some woundedness and hurts I'd experienced, and was experiencing this epidemic of inner emptiness that we're all in now. So I'm grateful for the timing. I do think it is a book for this time, but maybe it's a book that we've always experienced some of the realities of. They just are more evident right now because, as you said, we're not gathering together. We're not feeling the fitting in that sometimes happens with those gatherings, which can be mistaken for belonging. We are experiencing loneliness, and it's eating away at us.
One of the things, and you got to get this book. I mean, unless you want to live in a concrete box somewhere and never get hurt, this book is life-changing. And one of the reasons it is, Sharon, is you're incredible. Several times I said, I don't believe I'd have said that. You were so, I hate the word authentic, but you were so honest about who you are. Was that hard?
It was hard. And in fact, the first draft of the book was done 2 years ago. And my publisher, who I've known for 20 years, reached out to me and said, Sharon, I don't think you're ready for this book. I think there are some things in your own life you need to deal with. He knew I was going through incredible heartache with my own daughter. He knew that some of my insides did not match what I was presenting on the outside. And so it's a blessing to have friends like that. It also is really painful because it challenged me to really dig deep and discover what I believe about what is primary, which is trying to love other people the way Jesus loved us. And that is so hard.
You got to go through a lot of pain, don't you?
Yes.
Do you think that's true of everybody?
I think if you have a heart, it will break. And
that's encouraging. You just lost major sales on your book. I want you to know that. Listen, I don't want a publisher who gives me spiritual advice. That's my job. I say publishing, you stick to publishing, and I'll stick to Jesus, and you leave me alone. But I couldn't get away with it with your book.
Well, I think that I couldn't get away with the gap that was growing between my public life and my inner life. And there's actually peace found when those come together.
Did you, and we're coming up on a break, so we won't get time to it but I'll be interested if you discuss some of the things in the book with the people who are mentioned in the book. I mean, I would make them sign a release that was detailed and legal. Did you talk to anybody about, look, I'm doing this? Well, we'll find out on the other side of the break. Meanwhile, the name of the book is Belonging, Finding the Way Back to One Another. It's a hard way back to one another, but it is one that works. And on the other side of it, man, you'll dance and sing and speak in tongues. I'm a Presbyterian. I don't do any three of those. Thanks for joining us on Steve Brown, Etc. We're talking to author and speaker Sharon Hersh, and also one of our favorite people and our friend. Her new book is called Belonging, Finding the Way Back to One Another. And as I said in a previous segment, it's very, you bring a lot of people into here that, and I wondered if you got a permission before you talked about them. I sometimes threaten in a sermon to use people as illustrations using their name and place and time if they don't make a contribution to my retirement fund.
Well, I do sometimes have clients who start to tell me something and say, please don't write about this. But
this is off record.
Stories that really probably were the most difficult to tell were about myself. And so I do tell a significant story about my adult daughter. I do have her permission. I do get those waivers signed, Steve, from everyone who I tell a story about. But really, the stories that were hardest to tell were about me. And not necessarily, I do tell a story about getting a DUI that I've not talked about publicly until the last couple of years. And that's a hard story to tell because it is a story that reveals the ugliness of addiction and the selfishness that is involved in those processes. But the harder stories, honestly, were the stories to tell about my own spiteful, mean, sometimes embarrassed, self-centered, egotistic, narcissistic heart that show up in everyday examples, like standing in the line at Einstein Brothers Bagels or talking in a small group after church at Starbucks, where we sometimes show how divided we really are, not only from one another, but from our true selves, which God, I think, intended to be filled with compassion and curiosity, not necessarily debating and self-serving conversation.
Sharon, you talk about the stories we tell ourselves and narratives, and I truly believe that we have the capacity to become the stories we tell ourselves. So we need to make sure we have the right narrative. But can you talk about that danger of getting the wrong stories in our head and living that story and what can come out of that?
I think I've discovered that an unprocessed life often leaves us shackled. with a heavy burden that can distort us and shape us and shrink us into far less than God intended us to be. For example, the story that I would tell myself often in my addictive behavior was, no one can know about this. And I have to try even harder, do better to keep my true self from the world, which is an exhausting process. So when most of the time we are engaged in disconnecting behaviors, like I'm ashamed, I'm afraid, I need to prove myself, I need to fit in. It's like holding a beach ball under the water 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It becomes what consumes us rather than actually being present and connecting to one another where we are, because we trust the storyteller of our lives who tells us, I don't wait for you to get ready. I show up when you are of absolutely no use to anyone, because it's about my sufficiency. It's about my love. It's not about you. So that means the best thing about me, my best day, is not the most important thing about me. And thank goodness my worst day is not the most important thing about me. This book was a process of learning that maybe I'm not the most important thing about me. And that frees us to tell the truth about our lives and what the truths reveal, which is our deep, deep need for God and for one another.
Sharon, I wonder for people who live alone. It seems to me that it's easier to not take the time to look at your story, to exactly the kind of things that you were just talking about just now. You mistakenly, think that it's easier to hide it because there's nobody around, 24/7, that kind of thing. And taking the risk of intentionally welcoming somebody, into that inner circle of who you are and being vulnerable like that is absolutely terrifying.
Kathy, am doing fine when I'm by myself. I feel like I've really got this thing mastered.
Yeah.
And that's why God gave me children. Having two adult children who ask a lot of questions, who are in the challenges of trying to figure themselves out right now. I think maybe one of the most important sentences, and still probably the most convicting sentence I wrote in that book, is that I wonder what the way I live makes my children ask about God. Because they're the ones who really know me. They've seen me at my worst, and my best really does not impress them that much.
Do people like, that's a good question from Kathy. If you're single and you don't have children, you don't have to be with people. You can play those kind of games. And Kathy is the most connected person, and I literally mean this, of anybody I know. Kathy, you force yourself out of the house to be with people. Do you tell them the truth?
No.
I just want to see.
Are you crazy?
I don't have to think about, well, first of all, I'm not really good at covering up what I am. I mean, people who know me have a pretty good idea. I'm not good at, the kind of things you should be good at in order to not let people know like who you are out there in front of people. But as far as what goes on inside, no.
I've often told Kathy she shouldn't play poker. It just wouldn't work.
And I never have.
Yeah. Well, I kind of have a follow-up to that question that maybe we can hit on the other side of the break. But, for people who are married and have kids and they live in a household that's full of life, one of the things that I think this pandemic maybe has exposed is that you can be lonely even surrounded by people, right? Mm-hmm. And, so many of us, it's kind of like a flat tire. You can drive on a flat tire until you stop. And the pandemic has made us all stop And I know that there are a lot of people who realize their relationships, there's not much there. They've been doing a lot of stuff together, but when they had to stop, there wasn't much left, and they feel extremely lonely. So I'd love for you to talk about that, Sharon, on the other side.
And she will on the other side of the break. Guys, you got to get this book. It'll free you up, but it'll hurt before you get there. But it is so honest, and it's so doable. Hard, but doable. The name of the book is Belonging, Finding the Way Back to One Another. Get it and read it. In fact, make it a study for one of the small groups you're a part of. And then you all can get down and get honest. You're listening to Steve Brown, etc., and we're hanging out with author, counselor, speaker, and friend, Sharon Hersh. You can keep up with her at SharonHersh.com and on Twitter at Sharon Hersh. Zach, you had a question, but before you rephrase that question, you really shined on television. I mean, what a Christian witness you were. You want to tell us that story?
Yeah. So last week, my kids started school, but everyone started virtually for the first 2 weeks, and then they're supposed to go back in person. And so the first day, the news interviewed the family like right when school started. So all clean and you fixed up and looked happy and we're excited. And I said, my kids are going back to school in person, but if this goes well, we might keep them at home. And 30 minutes after that interview, everything fell apart. I mean, it was mayhem. I said words to my kids that I should never say to my kids. And so the news called back and said, can we interview the next day to just see how the first day went? And we had a totally different story. I was not a good witness for Jesus. I said, I will build a plexiglass cage for the teachers to teach from. I will put a hazmat suit on my kids. Like, they have got to go somewhere else. So anyways, all that to say, Sharon, during this time, we talked a little bit about loneliness for people who are single, but there's also a sense in which when all the activity stops and you're stuck in a home with your spouse, with your children, you might also find out that you've been lonely for a long time. You've just been so busy you didn't notice. So I wondered, what your thoughts on that are.
Well, I think one of two things, as we get opportunities, like Steve said, to finally be back in church in person. I have not done that yet. I sometimes go to Zach's Mega Church online, or I go to my own church every Sunday. But I think one of two things happens. We either stay on the surface of our lives, which has kept us lonely and empty, and we maybe talk about the Democratic National Convention, or we talk about politics, or whether we should wear masks, or whether kids should be in school, which clearly, Zach, you think they should be. Or we learn something from this season, and that is, no matter where you are on the issues of the day, when it comes to the stories of eternity, we connect with those. Oh, there's your little baby. When we the realities of our heart. So I've discovered that no matter where you are on a side of an issue, if you get together with someone and you say, hey, I don't know how to do this online learning thing. I'm losing it with my kids. Or I'm lonelier than I realized when I'm not so busy. Or I'm frustrated at feeling out of control. There is connection, because that does not, its foundation is not built on what we believe about a political issue or a perspective of the time. It is the reality of the human heart. And if we can start connecting about those things, first of all, it requires courage that we admit, I said some things to my kids that I should have never said. Oh, me too. And then we can build a conversation that creates belonging. The other thing that's happening right now is what I call the intimacy of having common enemies. And that can feel really gratifying at first, and it can feel immediate and intense, but it leaves behind a trail of polluted emotions and disconnection because it's not true belonging. True belonging is when I can show up and be me. When I have to fit in to be with you, that's false intimacy. And most of us have experienced fitting in. And this is our chance to show up and be ourselves, because it really is a matter of bringing life to our conversations and not draining them because we're already so drained.
Yeah, that's so true.
Sharon, you mentioned in passing in the previous segment about what's a moment that, or something I'm saying or something I'm doing that makes somebody curious about God, or to my kids, which is you're right, an absolutely sobering statement. I think the closest thing may be those moments like Zach is talking about, or that I know that I've had, where I did not say or do the right thing, but I come back to it and I talk to them and go, I am sorry I said that. I am sorry I lost control. Our best moments are not the best moments. Our best moments with our kids may be when we just own up to sucking at being a parent sometimes. I do think that could make somebody curious about God, because if it's okay for my mom and dad to do that, maybe it's okay for me to bring what I have to the table, which is not a lot. And God says it's okay.
If we wake up with an integrity hangover, what can I just participate in? That is our opportunity to be real about how much we really need Jesus.
Well, then maybe I have a shot at this.
Yeah, I think we can make another day out of this, right?
Call the reporters back.
Yeah, right.
We've got a lot more on the other side of the break. We're talking to Sharon Hersh and her book, and you really got to get it. It is a book that can make all the difference in the world. Maybe you'll have a kid who'll crawl up in your lap the way Zach's kid did. Might make all the difference as you go through the quarantine and the pandemic. At any rate, we're going to talk more about it. The name of the book is Belonging, Finding the Way Back to One Another, if you can. You're listening to Steve Brown, etc. And if you like this show, you'll want to check out our weekly email, Key Life Connection. Just go to keylife.org and /subscribe to see some samples. And there are very few things in life that are free, but this really is free. Go to keylife.org /subscribe.
Sharon, in the book, you told a couple of situations. I think one, the category of cross-cultural context. You talked about working with victims of sexual trafficking. I think it was in Cambodia or Thailand. And then a time where you were talking with a group of African-American teachers. And just, are there things that you learned from those particular situations that were unique or similar? Or?
Yes, I mean, it's a good question. And I'll start first at home, because probably as culturally different for me as anyone is my adult daughter, who's very progressive politically, who has some different ideas about living life than would be my agenda for her. And when she was in a life-threatening situation, God really reached into my heart and asked me to own some things in our relationship so they didn't own me anymore. And one of the things I recognized is I didn't even speak her language. And so I promised that I would learn to become bilingual. and try to speak her language. And from that, I think God began to stretch my tent as I recognized people around me, whether they were the senior citizens that attend my parents' church, or when my daughter and I did travel to Cambodia and get to meet with young women who had been sex trafficked and now we're trying to learn other life skills, or with a woman who was struggling with her sexuality in my church, or when I taught very badly a group of African American teachers because I don't know what I was doing there. They didn't know what I was doing there. All my stories were white. And I learned, first of all, to admit there are differences. And maybe I haven't done the work like I was willing to do with my daughter in a life and death situation, to learn to speak a language that's not just familiar to me, familiar to the people I'm around, that I'm not looking for a following. I really am looking for a connection. And that means with people in different places on the journey, with different perspectives. And really the basis for that is understanding how God loves me. I compare the love of God to, many of you might not get this, but Kathy, you will. One of those unforgiving mirrors that sometimes is in hotels where you see so closely, you see every pore on your face, every wrinkle, the double chin. And I hate those things. I think a relationship with God is kind of like one of those mirrors, that the closer he gets to us, the more he loves us. Well, why doesn't that happen with people? If we are to love as we've been loved, then that means the closer we get and we see our differences and the warning light goes off on the dashboard of our heart of, oh no, I might say something stupid, or I don't know what to say, or I just know what everyone in my group says. If we can just let down our guard and know that dividing lines do not nourish the soul. Dividing lines do not connect people. It's those realities of the heart that show we need Jesus. And the astounding thing is that Jesus doesn't want something from us. He wants us. What if we into relationships like that?
Amazing. You know, most of what we've talked about is pretty uncomfortable. You know, I'm a loner. I don't need other people. I say I'm a professional religionist, and it's important that I keep that mask on in order to keep my job. So when you talk like this, it's very uncomfortable. And you spoke some of the good stuff, but is it worth it to be that free?
It's messy. Because like I said at the beginning, we have to confront ourselves. And I had to look at my heart that can be unkind and embarrassed and mean and trying to prove something or protect something. But when we really understand what Jesus did for us, that he hung naked and stripped on a tree to bear our hell so that we could live in the truth, that we could live freely, then how can we approach anyone without a heart of welcome and a belief in the worthiness that God wants to innately bestow on every one of us? It's our misunderstanding of the gospel, Steve, that makes this hard. When we understand how much we need Jesus, how much I need Jesus. If he would go and die on a cross for a raggedy woman like me, he'll go anywhere. He'll go to anyone. And that should free me, not limit me.
You know, say a word, you know, this is, most of our narratives are self-righteous. And the self-righteousness is at the heart of the division and the hatred, the defending of oneself. I once wrote a book and said self-righteousness was far more dangerous than I thought it was. It is, isn't it?
Right, because self-righteousness says that I am the judge. And people who don't line up with me personally offend me. When you think how arrogant that is. Thank goodness the judge of all the earth, The only one who is righteous chose to bear all our unrighteousness and adamantly love us so that we could adamantly love one another. There is a high cost to being right. It will disconnect you in every relationship. And so maybe we give up being right for something better, which is giving and receiving love without an agenda. If I can show up, be seen just as I am, far from perfect, and love without an agenda, we experience belonging.
She just ruined my question. Totally annihilated it. I was going to ask you what you were thinking when you picked Steve to write your foreword, but you've obviously read.
We're out of time.
I'm about to brag on you, so hush.
That's just an inappropriate question.
You must have read his book, Talk the Walk.
I have read his books, and that's why I picked it.
Y'all could sell that as a combo deal. I think they would go together.
Sharon, thank you for being with us. You're always fun to have as a guest, and you're always welcome at our table. Keep writing these books, these life-changing books. We rise up and call you blessed. The name of the book, by the way, being held up now by Zach, is Belonging, Finding the Way Back to One Another. Sharon, you're great. Thanks so much. Guys, we're going to come back and tell you who we're going to do it unto next week. Knowing Kathy, it's going to be a great program, and you'll want to know about it. And in fact,
look how great I did this week.
That's true. Listen,
what could you want?
You shined. I mean, what else could we have wanted? We'll return. It's been a great hour. We're so glad that you guys spent some time with us. By the way, you can be among the first folks to check out our new 2020 edition of the Key Life Digital Magazine. Go to keylife.org/digital magazine to download your copy now. Sharon is always an amazing guest, and she's fun, and she's authentic, and she's honest, and she is in her book. And what she says is so very important. You know, we have our own narratives, and we keep telling ourselves this is true, and I'm this way, we're not that way. What if all of a sudden we were all required to wear a plaque listing our 10 greatest failures and sins? All of a sudden, two things would happen. First, we would be so embarrassed. And secondly, we would be so free. When you don't have anything to protect because of God, you don't have anything to prove because of God. You don't have to pretend to be something you aren't because of God. It changes everything, and you're free. And insofar as you get that, that's how far you're free. And so check out our book. You'll be glad that you did. Catherine, who's going to be our guest next week?
Well, next week, or actually, I should say a few weeks ago, we had our good friend, John Eldridge on, and we came in contact with a gentleman that John works with. His name is Morgan Snyder, and works with John. So next week, it's going to be a program that deals just with men. Our good friend, Pete Allinson, who is involved in a men's ministry himself, will be the guest. There will be no nary a female here. And Morgan Snyder's book is titled Becoming a King, and I don't know the subtitle, so I'm going to give it to one of the men to tell you the subtitle. I'm out of here.
Becoming a King, the Path to Restoring the Heart of a Man. And it'll be a total estrogen-free zone.
Kathy, would you bake some cookies and leave them before you leave?
No, you
No,
I mean,
can't.
that would be really.
You can't do that,
No.
Steve.
I'm not going to be here. I'm not going to
2020.
be here, so you will. So
There'll
you
be no
will
soft side.
appreciate me more.
Okay, guys, it's time for us to go. But like Jesus, we'll return, same time, same place next week. That's our fond hope that you'll join us again. And between now and then, don't do anything we wouldn't. That gives you a wide, wide berth.